Marry me for 6 months and then leave, the Billionaire CEO offered, but on day 179, she begged me to stay. The contract was 11 pages long, and the part that mattered was a single sentence on page 9. This arrangement shall terminate on day 180, at which point both parties will separate amicably and permanently. 6 months. Marry me for 6 months, the Billionaire said, and then leave. She slid the pages across her dead father's enormous desk like she was buying a used truck off a lot. It's a transaction, Mr. Carter. Nothing more and nothing less. I need a husband on paper to keep my father's company out of the wrong hands. You need money. Don't insult either of us by pretending otherwise. We both walk away in 180 days. No harm done, no strings, no mess. I've already had my lawyers make it clean. I'm a furniture mover. I make my living carrying other people's whole lives up and down staircases. A woman like Adrienne Sloan had never once in her life looked at a man like me as anything but the help, right up until the moment she needed the one thing only a stranger with nothing to lose could possibly give her. I should have said no. Every sensible bone in my body said no. Instead, I thought about my niece, asleep in the back of my box truck in the parking lot because I couldn't afford a sitter that day, and I picked up the pen and I signed. What neither of us knew, what we couldn't have known, signing that cold piece of paper across a dead man's desk, was that on day 179, the second to last day with the company saved and the foundation safe and the exit all neatly arranged down to the hour, the woman who called our marriage a transaction would be standing in a doorway, unable to make herself say the goodbye she had written into the contract with her own hand. But before I tell you about day 179, do me one quick favor. If you've ever been treated like the help by people who never once bothered to learn your worth, hit that subscribe button right now. This whole channel is built for the people who get looked straight past. Go on, I'll wait. Then let me start this where it actually starts, which is the day my little moving company got hired to pack up a dead man's house. My name is Wes Carter. I'm 41 years old, and I run a two-man moving company, me, my buddy Hector, and a box truck with 300,000 hard miles on the odometer, and a transmission that's making a sound I'm choosing to ignore. We pack, we lift, we carry, we drive. It's honest work, and it's hard work, and it has taught me more about human beings than any other job on earth ever could. Because you learn absolutely everything about a family by how they pack up a house. You learn who they really were by what they chose to keep and what they threw away. I've moved people up into mansions, and I've moved people out of foreclosures with the bank's notice still taped to the door, and I'll tell you what I've learned. The boxes don't lie, even when the people standing next to them do. I'm raising my niece, Junie. She's 7, and she's mine now. Not in the simple blood and birth certificate way, but in every single way that actually counts when the lights go out and a kid has a nightmare. My younger sister, Junie's mom, died 3 years ago when Junie was 4. It doesn't matter how, for the purposes of this story. What matters is that there was a single terrible moment in a hospital hallway under those flickering lights where somebody had to step up and become that little girl's entire world, all at once, forever. And the somebody turned out to be me. I wasn't ready. I want to be honest about that. Nobody is ever ready, and I was less ready than most. But you do it anyway, because the alternative is unthinkable. And somewhere in the doing of it, the not being ready quietly turns into the most important thing you'll ever be. So it's been me and Junie for 3 years now. She rides along in the truck on the days I can't swing childcare, with her coloring books and her headphones and a stuffed gray rabbit named Pancake. And Hector and I are very, very careful with our language around her, and she is, without 1 ounce of competition, the best thing I have ever done with my life or ever will. The Sloan job came in through the high-end estate channel. That's the work you get when somebody very rich dies, and the family needs an entire life packed up, sorted, moved, and stored, and they want a crew that won't gawk or steal or post about it. The pay was good, better than good. I took it without a second thought. I didn't even know whose house it was until we pulled up to a set of iron gates that took a full 30 seconds to swing open after the man on the intercom decided we were real. The man who died was Arthur Sloan. If you follow business news even a little, you'd know the name. He had built a single industrial company up into a genuine empire over 50 hard years, the real old-fashioned self-made kind of titan they don't seem to make anymore. And he had died at 81, and now a house containing 50 years of a vast life needed handling, room by room. And the woman standing in the middle of that cathedral of a marble foyer, directing all of it with a tablet in her hand and a jaw clamped so tight it had to ache, holding herself with the particular brittle stillness of a person keeping their grief at gunpoint so that it cannot move or make a sound. That was his daughter, Adrienne Sloane. 38 years old, and according to every business headline that month, the brand new head of everything her father had ever built. Here is the thing about the way Adrienne Sloane treated me that first day, and I lead with it because it's the exact place the whole story turns. She didn't treat me at all. She looked clean through me, the way you look through a window at the weather beyond it. I wasn't a person to her, I was a function that had arrived to perform a service, the way a dishwasher performs a service. She gave her instructions to a point in empty space roughly level with my forehead. Now, I've had a whole lifetime of being looked through like that, and it honestly doesn't sting much anymore. It's just the weather, and you don't take the weather personally. But I noticed it. You always notice it, you just stop letting it land. What changed her, and it happened slowly, over the 4 full days that first job ended up taking, was not anything I said. It was how my crew and I handled her dead father's things. Because here is something I know in my bones that the wealthy people who hire me almost never understand. When you pack up the house of a person who has died, you are handling, with your bare hands, the single most precious objects on the face of the earth to somebody, and they are perfectly disguised as junk. That chipped, ugly coffee mug is the one he wrapped his hands around every single morning for 40 years. That hideous lamp is the one she read 1,000 bedtime stories under, and most movers, most estate crews, will treat the whole lot of it like cargo, like freight, because it is faster and because to them it really is just stuff. I don't. I never have, not once, not since the day I packed up my own dead sister's little apartment with my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the tape gun. So my crew wraps the chipped mug like it's blown glass. We ask before we throw away anything that isn't obvious trash. We treat the entire house like every object in it mattered enormously to somebody, because it did, and because the somebody is usually standing right there, watching strangers decide what their love was worth. And on the second day, Adrienne came around a corner and stopped, and she watched me carefully, slowly wrapping her father's reading glasses. Just his ordinary old glasses, the ones he'd left folded on top of a book beside his reading chair, the way you leave them when you fully intend to come back and pick them up again. I wrapped them in tissue paper, and I set them into a small box all by themselves, so they wouldn't get crushed or lost in the churn of everything else. And she went completely still, and something deep in that stone face cracked, just barely, just for a second. Because I think, I learned later I was right, that I was the very first person in that entire grinding machine of lawyers and assistants and estate appraisers and accountants who had treated one single object in that whole enormous house as though it had ever once been loved by anybody. Most people just box it all, she said, quietly. It was the first complete sentence she had said directly to me, eye to eye, in 2 days. Most people didn't lose the man whose glasses those were, I said. You did. So, I'll take the extra minute. It's no trouble. She looked at me for a long moment, the way you'd look at an animal you'd been told was extinct. Then she nodded once and walked away without another word. But everything was different after that. She started seeing me, actually seeing me, a person with a name on his shirt. And, though I had no idea of it at the time, she also started, very quietly, behind that recovering composure, deciding something. The offer came on the last day of the job, when the trucks were nearly loaded. She asked me to come into the study, and she sat me down across that enormous desk that had been her father's, and she laid out the single strangest proposition of my entire life with the flat, unhurried efficiency of a woman reading aloud from a quarterly earnings report. Her father, it turned out, had been worried about her. Arthur Sloane, old-fashioned, self-made, sentimental in the gruff way of men who'd never learned the words, had spent years watching his brilliant only daughter pour every waking hour of her life into the company and never once build a single thing of her own outside of it. No partner, no family, no life. And so, near the end, he had done a thing that I am certain he meant as an act of love, and that landed instead like a steel trap. He had written a condition into his will. In order to inherit full control of the holding company, the controlling stake, the chairmanship, the whole towering thing, Adrienne had to be married within 1 year of his death. If she was not married by that deadline, control of it all would pass instead into a trust administered by a particular faction of the board. And that faction, she explained to me in a flat voice that didn't quite hide the fury underneath it, had every intention of carving the company up and selling it off for parts, and, in the process, quietly strangling the charitable foundation her father had built over the back half of his life. The foundation was the thing Arthur Sloane had been proudest of in all the world, prouder of it than of any of the money. It funded children's hospital wings and college scholarships for kids who'd never otherwise see the inside of a university, all across the state. Her father had thought he was gently nudging his lonely daughter toward building a life. Instead, he had handed his own enemies a loaded deadline and walked off the stage. "I am not going to fall in love on a schedule to satisfy a clause in a will," she said. "That's absurd, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend otherwise to you or to myself. But I can satisfy it. A real, legal marriage, entered into in good faith on paper, maintained for the 6 full months that the clause requires for what the lawyers are calling its good faith review, and then dissolved, quietly and cleanly, the moment that review is complete. What I need is a husband who is discreet, who is decent enough that my staff and the reviewers won't smell a fraud the moment he walks in, who has no hidden agenda of his own, and who genuinely needs the one thing I am in a position to offer in return." And then she named a number. I'm not going to tell you the number, but I'll tell you that it was a number that would change my life and my niece's life completely and permanently from that day forward. 6 months, Mr. Carter. We would share a residence for the sake of appearances, separate lives entirely under one large roof, and then, on day 180, you walk out the door, and you are set for the rest of your life, and my father's company and his foundation are both safe from the people circling them. That is the entire offer. You can say no. Most of what I'm counting on is that you won't. I want to be honest with you about that money because I'm not going to stand here and pretend I'm somehow above it. I'm a furniture mover with a transmission that's dying, and a 7-year-old whose entire future is balanced on the back of a man with a bad spine and almost nothing in savings. That number meant Junie would never have to worry, not about college, not about a roof, not about anything. It meant a real house instead of a month-to-month apartment. It meant that if my back finally gave out for good tomorrow, that little girl would still land soft. A man raising a child alone does not get to be too proud to so much as hear a number like that out. You owe it to the kid to at least listen. But I'll also be honest that I very nearly said no anyway, right there, because the whole thing felt like a lie wearing a suit, and I had made myself a quiet promise on the worst day of my life, the day I packed up my sister, that whatever else happened, I would live a life I could someday explain to Junie out loud, without once having to look at the floor while I did it. What tipped me in the end was something Adrienne said when she saw me hesitating. The CEO mask slipped just for a second, and underneath it was something tired and human. She said quietly, "I'm not asking you to lie to anyone who actually matters to you. I'm asking you to help me stop a man's entire life's work from being torn apart by people who never built a single thing themselves and never will. That's all this really is, underneath the paperwork. My father would have hated every part of this arrangement, but he, of all people, would have understood it. So I signed. Day 1. I told Junie that we were going to go and stay at a friend's really big house for a while, which wasn't a lie, exactly, if you held it at the right angle. Adrienne, to her considerable credit, had genuinely not factored a 7-year-old child into her clean little transaction, and I got to watch her realize it in real time on move-in day, the slow dawning on her face as a small girl with a backpack and a stuffed gray rabbit walked into the middle of her echoing marble foyer and looked all the way up at the chandelier and then asked, with total seriousness, where the bathroom was. I braced myself. I fully expected the woman to be cold about it, to treat the kid as an unwelcome variable in a clean equation. She knelt down. Awkwardly, stiffly, like a person who had genuinely never done it before and wasn't sure of the mechanics. And she said, "The bathroom is just down that hall, the second door. And, would you like to go pick out which bedroom is going to be yours? They're all empty right now. You can have whichever one in the whole house you like best." And Junie, who has not the faintest idea in the world that some people are billionaires and some people are furniture movers and that there's supposed to be a wall between them, simply reached up and took Adrian Sloane's hand and went off down the hall to go pick out a room. And I stood there alone in the middle of that enormous cold foyer and felt the very first crack run through my certainty that this was nothing but a transaction. I'm going to be straight with you about the 6 months because the truth of what happened is so much better than the version you're probably bracing for. For the first long while, it really was just a contract, exactly as advertised. We were polite roommates with a shared legal document and an end date. She worked 18-hour days every day, saving her empire and her father's foundation from the wolves on her own board. I kept my moving company running the whole time, partly because I was not about to become some kept man living in a rich woman's house, and partly because I knew, with total clarity, that I was going to need it to still be there waiting for me on day 180. We passed each other in long hallways. We performed marriage, convincingly, for exactly the handful of people who needed to see it performed. A charity dinner here, an appearance there, one perfect, smiling photograph aimed at exactly the right pair of eyes. It was strange, and it was hollow, and it was, for the most part, honestly fine. A job is a job. What I had not accounted for, what neither of us, for all her lawyers and all my hard-won caution, had remotely accounted for, was Junie. Junie lost her mother when she was 4 years old, and a little girl who has lost her mother that young is a kind of homing device, finely tuned and always quietly searching for one particular thing in the world. And she found that thing, of all the unlikely places, in Adrian Sloane. It started small, the way these things do. Junie took to waiting up at night, fighting sleep, just to say goodnight to her. And Adrian, who I am fairly sure had never once in her adult life been needed by another human being in a way that had nothing at all to do with money or power or leverage, did not have the first idea what to do with a 7-year-old stubbornly waiting up to say goodnight to her. And so she did the only thing a person can actually do in the face of that, which is show up. She started, without ever announcing it, coming home earlier. She started reading the bedtime story herself on the nights I was finishing a late job across town. I came home one evening, bone-tired, and found the billionaire chief, executive of an industrial empire, sitting cross-legged on the floor of a 7-year-old's enormous bedroom, being patiently and sternly taught the correct technique for combing the ears of a stuffed rabbit named Pancake, and taking the instruction with complete, frowning, total seriousness, like it was a board presentation. And the woman who held her own grief at gunpoint, who had clamped herself shut so nothing could get in or out, started, slowly, and I don't think entirely with her own permission, to thaw. Because you simply cannot keep yourself frozen solid around a child who loves you, that simply, with no agenda whatsoever, who does not know or care what your stock price did today or what you're worth on paper. Junie cracked Adrian open in exactly the same way she had cracked me open 3 years before, in the cab of a box truck. Children do that. It's their one great superpower, and they don't even know they have it. They love you, fully and without conditions, before you have finished deciding whether you've earned it, and the loving you is what makes you start trying to. And then there was me and Adrienne. Somewhere in the middle of all those months, the performing for other people quietly stopped being only performance. We started talking late, after Junie was finally asleep, really talking, the way you only seem to be able to do standing in a dark kitchen at midnight with the rest of the world gone quiet. She told me about her father, the man whose glasses I had wrapped in tissue paper, who had been brilliant and difficult and impossible, and who had loved her ferociously in a language she had spent her entire life straining to translate and never quite managing. I told her about my sister, and the hospital hallway, and the box truck, and the nightmares. We were, I slowly realized, two people who had both lost the one person who had made them who they were, and who were both holding that loss at gunpoint. And we recognized each other across that dark kitchen the way you recognize someone who speaks your native language in a foreign country. That is the one thing no lawyer on earth can write into a contract. Recognition. It just happens to you, or it doesn't. But here is what kept the whole thing from tipping over into a fairy tale. And it's the part of all this that I am genuinely proudest of. I never once let myself forget the date. Day 180 sat in the center of my chest like a swallowed stone the entire time, cold and heavy and always there. Because I had been somebody's obligation once before, in another life, before Junie, before any of this. I won't drag you all the way through it. But I had spent years being a man that another person stayed with out of pure duty rather than any kind of desire, and I knew, from the inside, exactly what that slow poison does to a soul over time. And now I had a little girl whose whole heart was visibly, daily, wrapping itself tighter and tighter around a woman who had signed a legal document formally promising to leave us both on a specific date. I lay awake more nights than I will ever admit to, sick with the fear that I was standing by and letting Junie pour her love into someone who was contractually obligated to vanish, that I was, with my own hands, setting my girl up to lose a second mother. And that fear, as much as it hurt, kept my feet flat on the ground even on the nights when my own heart was straining hard to lift off the floor. So, as the days ticked steadily down, day 150, day 160, day 170, I did the responsible thing, the thing that cost me more than I let show. I started, gently and carefully, preparing Junie for the two of us to move back into our own place soon. And I started pulling myself back, too, deliberately putting the wall back up, brick by brick, before the date could come along and knock it all down for me. Because I would 1,000 times rather break my own heart slowly, on my own schedule, on my own terms, than stand there and have it broken for me on a lawyer's calendar. Adrian noticed me doing it. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything. But she didn't say a single word about it. The clause was satisfied. The company was saved. The foundation was secure, funded, untouchable. Every last thing the contract had ever been for had worked exactly as designed. There was nothing left for either of us to do but quietly execute that final sentence on page 9. Which brings us, at last, to day 179. I was in the bedroom that had become Junie's, packing her small things into the same kind of cardboard boxes I pack for total strangers every week of my life. Except that these particular boxes were shaking, just slightly in my hands, the same exact way they had shaken in my sister's apartment 3 years before. Junie was at school. Tomorrow was day 180. Tomorrow we left, for good. I had that last clause of the contract running on a loop somewhere behind my eyes, separate amicably and permanently, and I was holding myself together in the only way I know how, which is to treat the unbearable thing like it's a job. Wrap the object, box it, label the box, load the truck. A man can survive very nearly anything on this earth if he can just convince himself for long enough that it's only a job. And then Adrian appeared in the doorway. She was supposed to be at the office. It was the middle of a workday. She wasn't at the office. She was standing in the doorway of the room where I was packing up the belongings of the little girl she had taught to comb a stuffed rabbit's ears, and she didn't say anything at all for a long, long time. She just stood there and watched my hands move. And then this woman, this billionaire who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals for a living without blinking, who I had never once in 6 months heard ask a single human being for a single thing, who plainly believed all the way down to her foundations that needing another person was the very worst and most dangerous weakness there was, said, in a voice I had never heard come out of her before, low and unsteady and stripped of all its armor, "Don't go." I kept wrapping the small shoe in my hands. I did not trust myself to look up at her. I knew that if I looked up, I was finished. "The contract's done tomorrow," I said, to the shoe. "It worked. It all worked. You're safe. The company's safe. The foundation's safe. That was the whole deal, start to finish." "I'm not talking about the contract." Her voice broke clean in half on the word. "Wes, look at me. I am asking you. I am asking you to stay. Both of you, not for the clause. The clause is finished, it's done, it's behind us. I'm asking you because—" and she stopped dead. Because the words she was reaching for were words she had quite genuinely never once said aloud in her entire life, and had no practice forming. "Because I don't want you to go. I don't want her to go. I can't. The house is going to be—" And she couldn't finish it. She just stood there, undone. And here is where I did the single hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Harder than signing that contract. Harder than the packing. Harder than the hospital hallway even. Because every cell in my entire body was screaming at me to drop that little shoe on the floor and cross the room in 2 steps and say, yes, yes, of course, yes. But I had a 7-year-old girl's entire heart sitting in my open hands, and I had my own hard, ugly, hard-won knowledge of exactly what it does to a human being to be stayed with for the wrong reasons, and I owed both of those things the truth before I owed anybody anywhere a happy ending. I set the shoe down carefully on the bed. I stood up straight, and I said, "No, not like this." She flinched as though I had struck her across the face. "Listen to me," I said. "Listen to me all the way to the end, because this matters more than anything I have ever said to anyone. I will not stay as a contract. I will not stay as the next convenient arrangement, as the thing that's easier than being alone, as the warm body that makes a big, empty house feel a little less big at night. I have been somebody's obligation before, Adrienne. I've been the person somebody kept out of duty instead of wanting, and it hollowed me out from the inside until there was almost nothing left, and I swore on everything I have that I would never, ever be that again. And I will sure as hell never, ever let Junie be the glue for somebody's loneliness. That little girl has already lost one mother. I am not going to hand her a second one who is staying because the house feels too quiet, and then stand back and watch it fall apart a year from now when the quiet stops scaring you, and the cold, hard reality of a furniture mover and a billionaire finally sets all the way in. She was crying now, openly, silently, this woman who held her grief at gunpoint, the tears just running down a face that wasn't doing anything to stop them. "So, I need you to do something you have never once done in your life," I said, and I made my voice gentle now, because the hard part was over, and this part wasn't a wall, it was a door. "I need you to stop being a CEO making a smart strategic retention offer to keep an asset from walking out. I need you to be a person, just a person, standing in a doorway, and I need you to tell me, plainly, with no clause and no money and no company attached to any part of it, because all of that is finished now. All of it is safe. None of it is in this room anymore. I need you to tell me what you actually want. Not what's smart, not what solves your problem, not what keeps the asset, what you want. And if it's real, if what you want is us, me and Junie, as your actual family, freely, because you choose it and not because you're frightened of the silence, then you say that to me, out loud, in your own words. And if you can do that, if you can say the true thing, then I promise you I am not going anywhere, not ever. But you have to say the true thing first, because we are not a transaction, and I am all the way done being one for anyone for the rest of my life." And Adrienne Sloane, who could command a hostile boardroom into silence, who could stare down a leveraged takeover without her pulse changing, stood in that doorway and did the single bravest thing I have ever watched another human being do. She stopped performing. The CEO simply went away, like a coat slipping off her shoulders onto the floor. And what was left standing there, when it was gone, was just a woman who had lost her father and had stumbled, entirely by accident, inside the 4 walls of a cold business contract, onto the exact family she had spent her whole armored life being far too afraid to ever go looking for. "I love you," she said. "Both of you. Not the arrangement, you. I have been alone my entire life, in a way that all the money only ever made worse, and I genuinely did not know it. I did not feel it, until a furniture mover wrapped my dead father's glasses in tissue paper because he thought they mattered, and a little girl sat me down on the floor and taught me how to comb a rabbit. I do not want this house to be quiet again. I do not want to go back to being the person I was before the 2 of you walked into this foyer. I am not asking you to stay because I need a husband for a clause. The clause is dead and gone. I am asking because I cannot picture my life anymore without the both of you inside it, and that terrifies me more than losing the entire company ever could have, more than anything ever has. That is the true thing. That is what I want. You. Please, please stay. No clause, no money, no company. Just the true thing, finally, said plain, by a person standing in a doorway. So I stayed. Now, I told you at the start that this is not a fairy tale, and I mean it even here, even now, even at the good part. We did not ride off into any sunset. We did it the slow way, the real way, the grown-up way. We tore up what little was left of that contract together over the kitchen sink. I kept my moving company, every bit of it, because it's mine and it's honest, and because Junie is going to grow up watching a man who works for his living, not a kept one. We went to the kind of counseling that two guarded, grief-scarred, walled-off people genuinely need before they have any business trying to fuse two broken families into one whole one. We took it one true day at a time, and some of those days were hard, and we kept going. Adrienne and I actually got married again, a little over a year later, a real one this time, small, no lawyers in the room, with Junie standing up front holding the rings and Pancake the rabbit in formal attendance on a chair of his own. The first marriage had been on paper. The second one was on purpose. That's the whole difference, right there, and it's the only difference that has ever mattered. Junie has a mom again. I will never, as long as I live, get over watching that happen. A child who lost everything she had at 4 years old, who I rocked through screaming nightmares in the cab of a box truck in dark parking lots, has a mother again. One who reads to her every night and combs the rabbit and shows up, and who, I will add, has never one single time in all these years treated my girl as anything less than fully, completely, ferociously her own. That right there is the whole prize. That's the entire jackpot. Everything else in the world is just details and paperwork. I want to say one last thing about the money, because I know it's been sitting there in the back of your mind this whole time. I never took the original payout, not a dollar of it. When we made the thing real, when we decided to actually build a life, I told Adrienne that I would marry her gladly, but that I would never, ever cash a single check for it. Because the moment money gets involved, you never again get to be completely sure. And I had watched, up close, for 6 months, exactly what that particular uncertainty had done to her entire life. Every kind word she had ever received suspected of being an angle. Every person who got close quietly checked for a price tag. I was not going to be one more of those, not even a well-paid one. So I kept my truck, and I kept my company, and I kept my own income, and we built a life in which I am her husband and her equal, and emphatically not her employee, not her arrangement, not a line item. She fought me on it, hard. I won. It is, to this day, the only argument I have ever won against that woman, and I have come to believe she let me win it on purpose, because my refusing the money was the one thing in the world that could finally, permanently prove to her that I had never, not for 1 second, been in it for the number. I make a decent living. I will never be a billionaire, and the honest truth is, I'd hand it all back if somebody tried to make me one. There is a version of Day 179 where I drop that little shoe the instant she asks and cross the room and just say yes, and take the easy, beautiful, golden thing being offered, and maybe, it even works out fine. And there is no version of that day where I do that, and also get to know, all the way down to the floor of myself, that she chose us as a person and not as a problem she was solving, and that my daughter's second mother is staying in this house because she genuinely wants to, and not because the rooms felt too big and too quiet without us in them. I picked the true thing. I'd pick it every single time. So let me ask you just one thing before you go. Adrienne spent her entire life so heavily armored that she very nearly missed the only family she had ever actually wanted, because to her, needing other people felt like weakness, and asking for them out loud felt like total defeat. And it took losing everything, and standing undone in a doorway, for her to finally manage to say one true thing out loud without a contract wrapped around it to keep it safe. So here is what I honestly want to know from you tonight. When was the last time you said the true thing? The scary one, the bare one, The one with no contract and no safety around it, to a person you were afraid to need? Tell me about it down in the comments. I read every single one of them, and I would genuinely love to know. And if this story got to you tonight, if you believe, like I have come to believe all the way down, that the single bravest thing a guarded person can ever do is drop the armor and just say plainly what they want out loud, then do me that one small favor. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. Drop a like so the next person can find their way here. Leave your own story down in the comments and I'll see you in the very next one. Trust me, it's a good one.